After last night's loss to the Boston Bruins, I don't know how many comments I read about how all of this is Marty St. Louis' fault. It's his problem because he's a lousy coach and stuff like that. And you know what? Part of it's correct. Not in the sense that he's a lousy coach, but in the sense that he needs to do more coaching. The problem is the compressed schedule has taken away that ability. And so while everybody wants to blame Marty for all the team's misgivings, I'm going to show you a few things that you need to know, and maybe you'll just change your mind. Let's talk some puck. Hey everybody, Costa here from PuckTalk Montreal, welcoming you to another edition of the show where I'm not going to focus so much on the team per se, but just a couple of subjects. A lot of it's going to have to do with the condensed schedule, and you guys are going to have to sit down and listen. You may not agree with my opinion, but I can tell you this, after having spoken to a lot of guys that have worked not only in the American Hockey League, but the NHL, I can tell you that these compressed schedules are a pain in the ass and that it inhibits them from doing their jobs. And I'll give you clear examples. But before I get into that, the first thing I want to do, of course, like we do every show, is make sure that you guys take the time to subscribe to the channel. So leave a like, subscribe for those of you who haven't already, and please make sure that you hit the notification bell so that every time I start to yap my gums, you guys are able to listen in and, chime in with your 2 cents. But I want to get to this because it's really important. And it starts with Xhekaj. I would have included Jaden Struble in this conversation, but honestly, Jaden Struble is an afterthought because he hasn't played very well all season long. And so I want to get away from that particular discussion, and I want to focus strictly on Xhekaj. Because outside of a single game this year where he gave away the puck twice, leading to goals, rightfully so, getting benched after that, he hasn't been that bad for the Montreal Canadiens. So I wanted to go in depth and look at the reasons why the Canadiens don't use him effectively. They end up overtaxing their defensemen. It's starting to create problems on the team. Last night, Lane Hutson was on the ice for 27 minutes. Huh? For a guy that small, despite the fact that he loves to be on the ice and he's got energy to burn for days, you also don't want to burn him out if you intend on going on a playoff run, right? Even if it is just one round or whatever the case may be. At the end of it all, you need to use everybody that you have in your organization. And if you weren't going to use Xhekaj from the get-go, then why have him in your lineup? But I digress. Let's talk about the whole reason why the Montreal Canadiens don't necessarily use Xhekaj as well as they should. And it starts with a lack of trust from the coaching staff because he's made mistakes in the past, okay, where he's a guy who's very high impact but high risk. And in their eyes, he's prone to taking penalties, missing reads, and over-engagement, which means he over-pursues the puck carrier. So when games are tightening up, the default is to go with the safer option and use the guys they trust and sit Xhekaj on the end of the bench. That's not an answer. Then there's the system vit is much more important than his skill set. Okay, St. Louis prefers to have, and I shouldn't say St. Louis, I should really say Stéphane Robida, prefers to have defensemen that can move the puck quickly, have clean zone exits, and are structured positionally. That's not to say that Xhekaj hasn't improved his positioning. He may not be quite where they want him to be, but the value in Xhekaj comes from the fact that he's a physical deterrent, he's intimidating at the net front, and he helps shift momentum with big hits. And so it doesn't always translate on a coaching whiteboard, even if clearly translates on the ice, but Xhekaj's value isn't necessarily in his systems play. It's more along the lines in his overall impact on every given game. Then there's the ice time hierarchy already being set. You know, number one, that Lane Hutson is going to get 1,000 hours and minutes on the ice, right? We know this. It's no secret. You take a look at Matheson and Dobson, you know they're going to get a huge chunk of it as well. Caden Gooley coming back, he's starting to get minutes. Alexander Carrier, although still getting about 15, 16 minutes a game, that's fine. And then, well, those extra 7 or 8 minutes that Lane Hutson's going to play are the ones that are being taken away from Xhekaj. That is another problem. Giving way too many minutes to one defenseman at the expense of another when the other hasn't done anything wrong. Even if you think it's the right thing to do, it's not. because you're not allowing that defenseman to even prove to you that he can make an impact when it counts the most. There's also the fear of the Canadiens taking penalties. This is a huge one because their penalty kill is about as good as putting acid on Aunt Jemima's pancakes instead of syrup, right? His penalty rate isn't outrageous. In fact, it's down from previous years. But his reputation is what scars the coaching staff. And so because he used to be the guy that used to chase the game and take penalties by hooking and grabbing and whatever, they don't want to put him on the ice. The fear leads to reduced usage, even when the team is getting worn down physically. That's not the right way to do things. And Stefan Robida, not Marty, because Stefan is the one that manages the minutes of the defenseman. He needs to be more aware of what's going on, and he needs to have that player engaged. Simple. If you don't have him engaged and you're focusing so much on giving Lane Hudson extra ice that Xhekaj is the odd man out, then why not just play 5 defensemen night in, night out and get it over with and stop putting the guy through all this misery? The ripple effect of all this not using Xhekaj effectively is the fact that you have overtaxed defensemen who are playing way too many hard minutes, right? Gap control slips late in games. Why? Because they're tired, fatigued, and they're making bad reads in an attempt to, in most cases, try to get goals and engage offensively. Net front battles are lost due to the fact that they're tired too. They can't move guys from the front of the net. It leads to game-tying and game-winning goals. We saw that yesterday. And then, of course, the physical pushback disappears over a 60-minute game. You're not going to be nearly as fresh to be able to move guys out of the way as you are in the late stages of the third period. It's just physiology. So it's not sustainable, especially over a long stretch of time. So you need to get into the habit of using all 6 defensemen. You don't necessarily have to use Xhekaj for 16, 17, 18 minutes. But a good 12 to 14 is a nice range of time for him to play in each game. This way you give him a chance not only to make mistakes and learn from them, but show you that he limits his mistakes and he's not as useless as you might think, Mr. Robida. And the irony of all of this is the fact that Xhekaj is exactly the type of defenseman who can absorb low-level minutes, which means, low-event minutes, I should say, where, it's cycle, take a hit, try to get, pin the guy on the boards, whatever. He can wear down forechecks with his body checks and allow easier zone exits, clean ones that Marty's looking for. He can protect tired teammates as well. And he can change the emotional temperature of a game with a single hit. But until the staff fully buys into his role and the fact that he's being underused and that they can actually trust him, the rest of the blue line is going to pay the price. And that's what we see late in hockey games, especially recently. The big picture is the Montreal Canadiens aren't benching Arber Xhekaj because he's ineffective. They're limiting him because the coaching staff prioritizes control over impact. They want to make sure that the right guys are on the ice for a given situation instead of having somebody out there who can make an impact with a big hit or a good play physically along the boards that can make all the difference. And that's when things backfire. Now, when you look at Arber Xhekaj, right, you also have to think about what the coaching staff values. And under Stefan Robida and Marty St. Louis, the team always prioritizes predictable positioning, fast puck movement, clean first passes, and very little chaos in the defensive zone. That leads to preferred-based ice time, especially the guys with higher skill levels, and it's not performance-based ice time, which is what you would get if a guy's playing well and you want to reward him for doing that. Instead, you end up with a guy who ends up playing .940 in a game who can't show you anything as far as his effectiveness or his ability to change a game. Could you imagine, for example, an Arber Xhekaj in against Tage Thompson as Thompson comes in on the wing and Arber takes him out along the boards? Twice they played Buffalo. Twice that didn't happen in the last couple of weeks. And so I'm anxious to see next Saturday when they play the Sabres in Buffalo again, whether or not Xhekaj is going to be in the lineup as that physical deterrent. It just goes to show you that the coaching staff really hasn't appreciated the work that Arber Xhekaj did over in the offseason to make himself better. He had one bad game, in my opinion, so far this season. He hasn't made any really egregious mistakes. And to put him on the bench because of, you want to use your other guys, especially when you've got a lead, is asinine, because then you're overtaxing your defense. It's simple. And that time management, while you're going to all say Marty's the head coach, and I agree, that time management falls on Robida first. And there's no harm on a team where communication is wide open for Arbor to ask for a meeting with Marty and speak to him about it and say, listen, you're putting me out there for 9 to 10 minutes and I don't know what you think I'm doing wrong. That's okay. You're allowed to speak your mind. You're not going to get punished for it. And I think that's the thing that worries people most, is that they think this is the old Montreal Canadiens under Michel Therrien, who would be the type of guy who would take a meeting with Hal Gill and be on his hands and knees saying, I can't move. Right? He'd be on the floor. Hal Gill has talked about this story. He walked in for a meeting because Michel Therrien wanted to see him. He was on his hands and knees. And, he turns around and he says, Hal, I can't move. And so Hal Gill thought something was wrong with him. So he's looking, do I go get a trainer? Do I what? No, look. And he shows him the video and he goes, I'm down on all fours and I can't move. Because that's how Hal Gill used to kill penalties. That's the type of asshole coaching we had before that we don't anymore. So the fact that our coaches are communicative and can speak to defensemen and explain themselves and allow those players at the same time to come and talk to them is a plus. And I think Xhekaj should take advantage of that and speak to Marty and speak to Robida and try to find a way to get himself more ice time. Okay? If he asks for it and he screws up, then by all means go back to it. But give the guy a chance. He's worked so hard in the offseason. He's up for contract renewal, and you're not giving him a chance to prove his value to the hockey team outside of chucking the knuckles. And that's completely unfair. If you wanted a guy like that, they're a dime a dozen. Go out and get Ryan Reeves. You can play for 5 minutes a hockey game, and he won't give a rat's ass because he knows he's not good enough to play. But Arbor Xhekaj has skill. He's got a big shot. He can skate up the ice. He's got relatively good vision for a defenseman, and he does actually make a good first pass. So instead of trying to hide behind the fact that he's a guy who could drop the mitts and you don't trust him, try trusting him. You never know what a player might do. Now, getting away from the subject of Arbor Xhekaj and his use, what I wanted to do now, as a coach myself, is really get into the whole discussion about how bad Marty St. Louis is as a coach. All right? I'm going to give you a very prime example. If you guys take a look at the standings right now, you're going to see that the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Montreal Canadiens have scored exactly the same amount of goals. You know what the difference is between the two teams? Tampa Bay has, I should say this differently. Montreal has allowed 45 more goals than the Tampa Bay Lightning. That's the difference between those two teams. All right? So we know that early on in this season, somebody by the name of Sam Montembeault could have stopped a beach ball, and he was allowing 5-6 goals a game. Therein lies most of your difference. So I'm going to start by saying this team isn't very much different than the Tampa Bay Lightning in the sense that they could put the puck in the net. The problem is, with the goaltending, they can't exactly leave it out of the net. That's problem number one. And that's not necessarily all on Marty. A lot of that has to do with the fact that Eric Raymond is a subpar goalie coach. But I've talked about that a million times over. So I'm not going to revisit that. You all know that I want Marco Marciano to take over, and I want Eric Raymond to be served his papers. Not going to continue talking about it. What I am going to talk about, though, is how handcuffed every coaching staff, not just Montreal's, but every coaching staff in the National Hockey League is, as far as being able to get their teams prepared. Keep in mind that a lot of the other teams that we're talking about in this league, like Tampa, like Detroit, like Florida, okay, they've been playing together for a significant amount of time. They don't have that many new players. They don't have that many young players. Yes, there are still young teams in the league, but those teams as well need time to help develop their players. And the compressed schedule doesn't allow for it. Why? Well, the first rule of thumb that you guys need to know is coaching doesn't happen during hockey games. It never has, and it never will. Okay? The only time you see coaches do anything is at timeouts when they want to try to get a specific play in and they crack out the whiteboard. That's the only time they coach. The rest of the time, they may get in a player's ear, try to give them a pointer or two, but they're not coaching. They're simply going through the motions on the bench, managing the ice time, and trying to get the right guys out there for different matchups. But in a compressed season like this one, practice time basically disappears. Young teams grow in practice, not in games. With the back-to-backs, 4 and 6s, and the heavy travel, practices turn into video sessions, optional skates, and therapy days. And so that brutality of the schedule, it's taxing on teams, not just the Montreal Canadiens. So it keeps the roster from learning NHL level structure, reads, and habits. Veterans can autopilot systems that they've run for years. Young players can't. And that is part of the reason why you see some of these struggles this year. In the sense that the 5-on-5 isn't really playing as well as they could because guys like Noah Dobson are new to it, right? So the other guys have played it, Lane Hudson has done it for 1 year. Kane Gooley's done it for a couple since Marty St. Louis came in. 4 years. Alexander Carrier just learned to do it last season at the tail end. And he's still not good at it, right? Because he's made mistakes over and over. So without that practice time, it becomes very, very difficult to create drills, get guys comfortable, and teach them the right way to do things. And bad habits tend to stick around longer. That's the second thing. When mistakes happen, whether they're missed coverages, poor line changes, risky puck management, whatever, there's often no time to reset and correct them properly. You're doing it on the fly, right? Again, through video sessions. You see the same issues resurface game in and game out. And God knows we've seen that from Montreal. And there's no real teaching window to be able to get these habits out of these guys. Physical and mental fatigue hit young guys harder. Why? Not necessarily because they're not in the right shape to be able to handle it. They're just not used to it. Young players can skate forever, but decision-making is what goes first on a young player, right? So their reads get slower. Panic it sets in, actually. It doesn't go away. They start to panic with the puck, and they start chasing instead of anticipating. And that's where a lot of these things, when you take a look at Montreal, for example, that's where it comes from. When you take a look at the second line, for example, they're struggling right now. Why? Not because they're not playing a good brand of hockey, but because they're having a tough time dealing with the fact that teams are starting to focus on them a little bit more. Their time to be able to read plays is starting to dwindle, and in that, they're panicking because they realize, oh shit, I got to get rid of the puck faster, and they don't, right? That's why the Canadiens often look sharp early in hockey games, but then they start to unravel late because of the fact that they're so energetic to start, but because they're not used to the taxing schedule, they fatigue a little bit faster, right? So the thought process isn't there. Other teams, adjust mid-period. They start to pressure the puck a little bit more, and everything starts to go crazy, especially with this dense schedule. Developing your players gets uneven. For anybody that turns around and says the NHL is not a development league, from the time you put on your first pair of skates to the time you hang them up, you're always developing as a hockey player, okay? A guy like Sidney Crosby, who came in with a specific skill set in 2006, right? 2005, after he was drafted. When he came into the league, he had a specific skill set, and he played to that strength. He didn't have to develop, he was there. But over time, as he gets older and things start to leave him, like a little bit of speed, like a little bit of strength, whatever the case is, and it doesn't matter who the player is, he has to change his way of playing. He has to develop a new style of play in the middle of his career. So don't tell me the NHL isn't a development league, because it is. Whether it's young players or old, you're always changing, you're always developing, you're always learning. Period. Okay? But the compressed schedule also forces coaches to shorten their benches, lean on safe veterans like we've seen from Montreal, and reduce situational reps for younger players. Though that lack of situational reps for younger players hinders their development, it also hinders their confidence. We talked about earlier how Jakub Dobeš was playing extremely well, and then he was put to the wayside to allow Sam Montembeault to start a few more games and bring in Jacob Fowler as well, and that hurt Dobeš. Don't you think the same thing happens here, where you're trusting your veterans and the guys that you know are safe to do things right? It's the wrong way to think, right? Are we not agreeing with this? And so that's part of the whole compressed schedule issue, where you've got to do that. And on the flip side, and why this matters, is the schedule is accelerating the learning curve in one key area: adaptation under pressure, okay? Young core players are being forced to process faster, handle adversity nightly, and learn recovery habits early. And not every player recovers the same way, okay? A guy like an Ivan Demidov, who's taller and skates with a specific type of width, isn't going to recover as quickly as, say, I don't know, a Cole Caulfield, who's a little bit shorter, gets bumped into a little bit more, it's physically demanding on them, right? So they don't recover the same way, right? So younger players like Demidov need to adapt and learn how to take care of themselves so that they can be ready for the next game. They haven't learned that yet. Same goes for Oliver Kapanen, and that's why he's struggling right now. Those reps are painful now, but they're going to be extremely valuable long-term to allow the players to actually learn quickly and learn how to recover much faster. The bottom line is the NHL compressed schedule has slowed structural growth, exposed consistency issues, and limited teaching time, but it hasn't stopped the rebuild. That's still a work in progress. The one thing that it is doing is it's showing the Canadiens, hey, we need to develop this guy a little bit more next year on this guy a little bit more on that, but it's about next season. They can't do it now. There's no time, okay? Now, another thing that we really have to peel back on is that development happens in practice blocks, not in games, right? The biggest and most misunderstood point about coaching is the fact that it doesn't happen behind the bench. And I mentioned it before, right? The way it works is this: the game exposes problems, practices isolates them, drills rewire habits, and the next game tests the fix out. That's the structure of everything, right? So you go from games where you see mistakes and you jot them down, practice where you create drills to mitigate those mistakes. The drills rewire your players' habits, and then you test them again in games. But here's one part that people don't accept and don't realize, is that for a player to actually do something naturally on the ice, he has to repeat something over 1,000 times, okay? Which is why you have repetitive drills every so often to be able to get those reps back in, right? For the most part, you're talking about individual tactics when it comes to, the right way to cut, the right way to use your edges, stuff like that. But it also concerns tactical, right? You can yell all you want in Marty St. Louis, why doesn't the team do this? When are you going to teach them? Okay? Again, games is where you see the mistakes. If you don't have practice time between your games to actually correct that, what do you want him to do exactly as far as coaching is concerned? And you can talk to any coach in the National Hockey League. It doesn't matter who it is. They'll tell you the same thing, right? My team's making mistakes, but I don't have time to correct them. I can only point them out and explain what I want them to do, but we can't do any drills to be able to actually fix the problem. I mean, instead of, for example, under this compressed schedule, your steps 2 and 3, which is practice isolating problems and drills to fix them, right? Or to rewire habits. Instead of being able to teach, let's say, gap control, defensive rotations, forecheck layers, breakout timing, penalty killing, pressure, stuff like that, you get, here's the clip, don't do it again, and we play tomorrow. I don't care what kind of coach you are. I don't care if you're John Cooper. I don't care if you're Scotty Bowman. There is no way that in that time period, with so many games compressed together, especially you're talking about 17 back-to-backs this season for the Canadiens, okay? Not to mention some weeks where you're playing 5 out of 7 days. There is no way that you can force your players to hit the ice because it's in their collective bargaining agreement, number one. And number two, it's physically impossible for them to be able to do it after so much energy being expended on the ice in games. And that's something the NHL needs to fix. Not the Canadiens, not Marty St. Louis, not Kent Hughes, and not Jeff Gordon, the league. If you're going to go to the Olympics and create a 2-week window where you can't do sweet you know what, then what you need to do is start that season earlier. Screw the preseason, they're already doing that. But don't start on October 10th. How about starting on September 15th and give yourself a 4-week window to allow more games to be spread out and give your coaches a chance to actually work with their teams? That thought ever occurred to anybody? Probably not. But that's what it is, right? That's the world we live in, where you need to have your preseason is literally 3 weeks, and then you get into the regular season. When you can actually start your preseason in September on the 1st and start the season on the 15th. It's as simple as that. But no, we're not going to do that. There's no way. It's impossible. It's not impossible. I get that players want to go to the Olympics. What am I looking for? It's special. It's, it's an honor. Whatever acronym you want to use to describe it, okay? But the thing is this. There are over 800 players in the National Hockey League. Or is it 800? No, 650, closer to 700 players in the National Hockey League, okay? And if that's the case, right, how many of them actually go to the Olympics? What are you talking about? 100? Maybe? The other 600 players have to sit there for 2 weeks and twiddle their thumbs while they wait for the other guys to get their dream and come back, right? There's no guarantees they're going to win. There's no guarantees they're going to lose. But they go to the Olympics, they have the experience, and then they come back. And that's fine, right? But if you're going to do that for a 2-week window where you've got everybody sitting down doing nothing, how about instead of sitting down and doing nothing, okay, the teams are allowed to work on certain things during that break. Instead of allowing your players to take off on vacation and rent a boat and get into trouble, how about keeping them in town and say, okay, guys, do me a favor, take a week, relax, come back, let's work for a week. It's not tough to do because most of the time when you take a look at, for example, the Montreal Canadiens, there's a couple of 4 players going to the Olympics? 5 maybe? And after that, everybody twiddling their thumbs, right? You know that Lane Hudson's going to be on the ice. Why not get the other guys out there and say, listen, guys, practice, let's go. And I'm not talking about having Adam Nicholas out there. I'm talking about Marty being on the ice with Stefan Robida and what the hell is the other guy's name again? Oh, why am I drawing a blank? Trevor Letowski. I keep getting Drake Barahowski's name in my head for some reason. But Trevor Letowski. Okay, get the 3 of them on the ice along with Adam Nicholas. Get Marco Marciano up to work with the goaltenders because they're all going to be there. So work on it. Get them functional. Get them fixing what doesn't work. I just don't understand anymore. And the argument that you guys have that Marty St. Louis is a lousy coach, none of you were saying that last year when the team got into the playoffs. This year, though, he's a lousy coach because the team for 52 games was one of the top 3 in the division. But he was a worse coach than he was last year. And that's not wrong. Why? Because he didn't have time to coach. He had time to watch, observe, and relay to his players what he wanted them to do, but he couldn't actually drill it into them so that they could remember what he wanted them to do. So the argument that Marty is a bad coach applies to maybe 31 other coaches in the National Hockey League this year because they all have the same problem. They have limited practice time because of the compressed schedule. And while Detroit's playing better, good for them. And while Tampa is still second in the division, good for them. They've allowed less goals because they have better goaltending. A simple fix if you can find a goaltender that can stop pucks, right? And then what? What's going to be your argument? Tampa has 177 goals. Montreal has 177 goals. Montreal has allowed 175. Tampa? What is it, 130, 128, I think, or 129. That's how many goals they've allowed. Maybe a little bit more than that. But you understand what I'm saying here. 45 more goals than the Montreal Canadiens, that the Montreal Canadiens allowed this season. There's a reason they're in the first wild card and the Tampa Bay Lightning aren't. That's it right there. Simple. Keeping the puck out of your net. Goaltending. Those are the two things that we've bitched about for how long in Montreal? You're talking about Matheson, you're talking about Dobson, you're talking about Carrier, Struble, Xhekaj, Guhle, and Lane Hudson. All 7 of them. That's who you're talking about. Throw in Engstrom, who literally was here for a song and dance and did very well while he was here. That is the reason why this team is where it is right now. Defense and goaltending. It's not their power play. It's not their play at 5-on-5 in scoring goals. It's keeping the pucks out of their own net. How do you fix that? You drill it. You practice. You note it. You create drills. You run the drills in practice. And then you test out what you learned in the next game. Unfortunately for us, that time is very limited when it comes to this season. Now, as I've mentioned, up until the time the Canadiens actually go on the Olympic break, which is on February 4th, they don't have a single back-to-back. They may have a chance to be able to practice a few things in between. But again, after all the games that they played up until this point, a lot of fatigue has set in, a lot of bumps and bruises have set in. We know that Nick Suzuki worked through an ankle issue just after Christmas, right? And he wasn't skating as well as he normally does. Now he seems to be skating a lot better, right? There are guys that were out of the lineup all season that are coming back. Kirby Dach, Caden Guhle. You're going to see Patrick Laine coming back soon. Alex Newhook, hopefully before the end of the season. And all these guys have one thing in common. Lack of practice time. And while Laine gets on the ice and he works on his ability to move and do things right after his abdominal injury, and Guhle did the same thing by skating after he tore his abductor or groin or whatever you want to call it. It's not to say that they aren't practicing their individual skills, right? We saw Kirby Dach doing skating drills too as he was coming back, right? Those are all individual tactics and drills. When it comes to coaching a team, you got to be able to take the group, every line, and have them go out there and run drills together in order to be able to learn and move forward. That's not happening. So you can't say it's all on Marty. Can it be better managed? Sure. Should you trust your players more? Absolutely. But to say that it's bad coaching, I mean, I'm not going to say it's perfect, okay? But up until this point of the rebuild, I respect everything that Marty St. Louis has done with this hockey team, okay? He's taken them from being in the cellar to being number 1 in the division just a few weeks ago. Now they're in the first wild card. They're not far from getting back to where they need to be because the Atlantic is so tight. Couple of adjustments, a little bit better goaltending, and that could flip on itself. But they're coming up on a tough week, as we mentioned before, right? They're taking on Vegas, they're taking on Colorado at home, and then they're driving down to Buffalo to take on the Sabres again for the 3rd time in 3 weeks. Let's just say the NHL schedules haven't been too kind with the Montreal Canadiens, especially at this time of year. But in saying that, right, I'm not going to sit here and allow people to say that this is a coaching issue, because it's not. If it's league-wide, the entire league's got the same problem. And it's up to the league to correct it. You want to, like I said, you want to go to the Olympics? Start earlier. You can't start earlier? Don't go to the Olympics. Very simple, right? When it comes to that, just turn around and tell the players, sorry guys, if we can't start earlier because you guys collectively bargained otherwise, then how am I supposed to send you to the Olympics in good conscience when I know over the course of the season you guys are going to get overtaxed, possibly hurt, and overtired? You know what? That would make total sense to me as a player to say, you know what? You're right. But not all players think the same way, right? Some of them are very selfish and don't think about the team. They think about themselves. Therein lies the problem. So stop blaming the coaching, because until Marty St. Louis has the time to coach, what more are you supposed to do at this point? We know what needs to be corrected. I'm sure he knows what needs to be corrected. The question is, when can he correct it? He can't. There's no time. Maybe after during the Olympic break, he could do a few things with the players that stay behind, like I said. But overall, there's not much. That's it for this episode, guys. I hope you appreciated what I said. I know some of you are not going to like it, and you're going to completely disagree, and you're probably going to go into the comments and bash me for being a Marty lover. That's all fine and good. I'm not a Marty lover. I'm a hockey coach, and I understand the fact that when you don't have time, ask yourself this question. If you're a parent out there and you have kids that play minor hockey, ask yourself this question, right? After the season begins, how much practice time does your team actually get? And is there enough? I read an article recently that said that in Quebec alone, there's an issue with rinks and the ability to have players practice. You want to know why Quebec-born players aren't being selected to the National Hockey League? That's part of the problem. There's no infrastructure to allow the players to grow. And I'm sure the same can be said for other provinces as well. There can always be more rinks because there's always more players. It's the same thing. If you can't practice, you can't learn. If you can't learn, you can't play. And that's what's happening right now in the National Hockey League. Ciao for now. We'll see you during tomorrow night's preview of the Canadiens versus the Vegas Golden Knights.